Okay, thank you very much. So, as I mentioned before, today we are very delighted to have Santosh with us. But just before we start to talk, I'm going to ask a few questions to Santosh so that we could have more of an idea to know like Santosh. So Santosh, what do you usually do?
Thanks, Daniel. I work as a church minister in southwest London, so I am involved in all sorts of things that our church does. Currently, more of it online like this, but been here for a couple of years near Wimbledon is where we live with my wife, and we've got two young kids.
Cool. So besides working in the church, like what's your hobby?
Oh, good question. I think I don't really have very many interesting hobbies. I read all sorts of things, random things. I have recently started reading little bits of history and behavioral psychology, neither of which are my specialist interests at all. But I'm just started a book on Winston Churchill's memoirs from World War II. It's a big fat book, bizarre to get that perspective from someone. So I just read at the moment. One of our regular pastimes is just taking our 2 year old son, who's learning how to use a scooter, round the block where we live. So, that is definition of rock and roll, isn't it? So that's me most of the time playing with small kids.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. Just
Thanks
a
for saying it.
final question. So what's the most interesting thing that you have done during lockdown?
Oh my goodness. Well, we moved house during lockdown with these two little ones, and I think trying to there's a sort of big shed out in the garden, and trying to make that place habitable and useful. And we've actually this is probably the coolest thing about our house now is we've got a kind of very mini gym in there. So I've set up my first ever gym in lockdown in my own garden. That was quite fun.
Okay, sounds really interesting and exciting. Okay, anyway, thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over the time to Santosh.
Thank you, Daniel. As Daniel said, we're thinking about this question: sex, relationships, and Christianity. Um, and I'm very conscious. I don't think I know very many of you at all, and it's I'm sure a difficult and controversial question in some ways because actually talking about sex, relationships, things that are very precious and personal and profound is always difficult. I I kind of get that and I realize that right from the outset. The picture I was thinking of here is that we all come to this with our own fragility. The if you get a delivery come through the door, sometimes they've got that symbol on the side saying fragile, handle with care. And thinking about personal things like sex and relationships, I feel is like that. But the problem, obviously, is here we are on Zoom. I'm talking to a screen, looking at a little green light on the top of my laptop. It's the equivalent of the delivery man who might be about to just dump a load of stuff at the doorstep, knowing it's fragile. So just to be aware, I'm conscious of that, and I don't want to, in trying to cover lots of ground quickly, I don't want us to miss the fact that, of course, we're talking about things that are personal to us in different ways. And were we able to be face to face, sat down one on one, I'd love to hear a bit more personally where you might be coming at this question from. But it is what it is, and we come to it, as I said, it's delicate sometimes. And of course, we all come with our own baggage. Every single one of us here, we have a history, we have a past, we have things we were told when we were young, things that have happened to us, things we've done, all in this area of sex and relationships and our expectations, maybe of religious faith, Christian faith, or others. And I know, therefore, we don't come to this question as if we're neutral or as if we're a blank slate. We all come with our baggage. And again, I just want to affirm that and understand that as we begin. Of course, our baggage is not just the personal story stuff that we bring. I think we also bring baggage in the way that we think and we talk. And even when you say the word sex, what sort of web of expectations is formed in your mind? I think there's a few different things we might think of when it comes to sex, relationships, maybe especially thinking in terms of religious faith. The first is some of us think this must be a restrictive or negative or somehow shameful or bad thing. I've got lots of friends and people I work with here who say that's their experience of religion when it comes to sex, basically saying sex is somehow bad and therefore it's a restrictive picture. Maybe that's how you think or have thought. Of course, for others of us, we think sex is just kind of biological fact. It's our instinct to replicate our own DNA and pass on our gene line into the future. And that's all it is. It's just, there was a song, I think, in the maybe early 2000s by the Bloodhound Gang. You and me, baby, ain't nothing but mammals, so let's do it like they do on the Discovery Channel. That was a song. We're just animals. It's just DNA. It's biology. It's what it is. And that's how some people think about sex. Of course, it's not quite as simple as that, because we realize sex and relationship affects the way that I interact with others. And it can very easily become, I've put the picture there, it's almost like a trade. It's almost like a currency. You give something to get something. They used to say, an old stereotype, that men give love to get sex and women give sex to get love. That's, of course, a massive stereotype. But the idea that we are almost involved in an interpersonal trade of some kind, and therefore sex and beauty and related things become almost like a currency to be used or to get what I want. And again, I use the image there of the phone because dating apps and the smartphone and the internet can commodify that, and we would say someone is on the market. There it is. It's a trading language. And so maybe that's how we think about sex. It's a way that I find my place and I make a trade and I get what I want, or find a way to kind of get on using my body and using my looks and whatever else. But I say that sounds, most people would feel that that's a little bit too crude in terms of how we actually feel and live. Nobody just thinks it's a simple trade. That's why there's more involved. And therefore, for some of us, actually, sex and relationships and intimacy is almost like a mirror in which I can see who I really am. Some of my deepest hopes and longings and yearnings are found in this mirror of sex and relationship. Do I see something that I like? Do others see something that is beautiful? And suddenly it all feels very profound. This is the thing that defines me. And if there's various historical and cultural reasons why we might think like that, and you might want to tease that out in the questions. Now, sometimes when you're asked to speak about this as a Christian speaker, they say, oh, well, it's Christians who are obsessed about talking about sex. Why is it that? And I just want to say, I don't think it is particularly Christians who are obsessed about this. I think because of what we've just seen, the issue of sex is everywhere. So whichever of these views you might hold, and maybe we hold a mixture of different ones at different times, you can't get away from the fact that issues of sex are all over our culture, in terms of the music we listen to, in terms of things we see on Netflix or on YouTube, or books, novels we read. Who we are and how we're seen and what we long for and what makes us valued through sex and other things is everywhere you look. Now, if you don't believe me, yesterday, just as a completely random trial, I looked up what's the #1 single in the charts at the moment. I don't know if anybody would back themselves to have a go. What's the UK #1 single? Put it in the chat if you think you know. I didn't know, but I discovered it's by this lady, Olivia Rodrigo, who has written a song called Driver's License. Again, I didn't know anything about this song until yesterday when I found it. Here's the lyric: just got my driver's license last week, just like we always talked about, because you were so excited for me to finally drive up to your house. But today I drove through the suburbs, crying because you weren't around. And you're probably with that blonde girl who always made me doubt. She's so much older than me. She's everything I'm insecure about. Yeah, today I drove through the suburbs, because how could I ever love someone else? And I know we weren't perfect, but I've never felt this way for no one. And I just can't imagine how you could be so okay now that I'm gone. Guess you didn't mean what you wrote in that song about me, because you said forever. Now I drive alone past your street. Now, if you actually know that song, I'm sorry, probably the way that I've told it has butchered the musicality and the lyrics and the flow of the song. That wasn't what I was trying to do. But it is interesting that I've never met this lady. I don't know anything about her. But even just hearing that song on YouTube yesterday, I felt drawn to what she was saying in the song. She had these hopes of this relationship that would last forever, and they talked about driving to his house, and now that it's there, she's got the car, he's not there. And that's the longing. You said forever. Now I drive alone past your street. And I guess there's something of that forever longing that we hope for in sex and relationships. And something of that great fear that we might end up alone. That means, of course, this is a big question. And of course, we feel it very deeply. And I guess, as I said, everybody thinks, and whatever you think about sex, whatever those icons you're closest to, it's always part of a much bigger story. There's always more going on than just sex and a physical or physiological act. It's part of a way of looking at the world. It's part of the way of looking at yourself and other people and hopes for the future and the way the world should be. All sorts of big questions are tied up in this narrow question of sex and relationship. And I guess when we come to think about Christianity and how does the Christian faith speak into this, again, we'll come with various assumptions. I guess for some of us, many of us, we might think, well, basically religion has a very restrictive view on sex. It's the handcuffs picture that you're thinking of. Maybe not. But I put it to you as someone who works as a Christian minister and works with people from a range of faith backgrounds and none. I think most people come to this question without really having understood what Christianity has to say at all. We've got assumptions, we've got baggage, but we've not really read what the Christian scriptures say, and therefore we don't really know what the bigger story is that Christianity presents. Because like everything else, Christianity does tell a bigger story. I was reminded by this quotation by G.K. Chesterton, a writer from the last century. He says, "The Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It's been found difficult and left untried." He's saying, we think people have tried Christianity and it's failed. Actually, we've not. We may be conscious of ways in which Christian ethics in this or other areas are difficult, but we've not really put ourselves into that bigger, truer story. And the claim that I would like to present to you very briefly today, yes, our view of sex is always part of a bigger story. I put it to you that Christianity offers a better story about sex and what it represents and what it means for us and for the world, but a bigger story about everything, about the universe, about time and eternity, big questions. Christianity, the wider story into which sex has a very specific place. I put it to you, you won't find a better, more wonderful story than the one you find in the Christian gospel. Now, it's a big thing. Briefly, I want to say sex, according to the Bible, is the top picture. It's a sacred gift. It's not just something you do with your body. It's not restrictive and bad. It's a gift. It's a good, a beautiful, precious thing given to us from above, a sacred gift from our Creator. And I know you might have lots of questions to do with that. But more than that, I also want to say sex itself is something of a signpost that points beyond itself. And that's where the Christian story really comes into its own. Now, where do we go to look at this? I could have gone anywhere in the Bible. I've taken us to a slightly unusual place to go. Song of Songs, you may know, is it's a love poem in the Old Testament. And I grew up in church. I grew up in churches where we'd hear talks from the Bible and we'd do a youth group Bible studies. I don't think we ever had one on Song of Songs. And when you come to see it in a moment, you might understand why they didn't particularly want to give this to teenage boys, though interestingly the poetry, it seems, was written as part of a wisdom tradition that was specifically for young people navigating the big questions of life. So here's a poem, and as we read this poem, I wonder how, just think to yourself, is this what I think Christianity has to say about sex and relationships and intimacy? This is the first verse is the woman speaking in a relationship, the young woman. She says, "I am a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys." That was a fairly common, ordinary flower, nothing particularly special, is she saying. It's a sort of humble, self-deprecating thing. I'm a rose, I'm a lily, like all the others. Then the man speaks and says, "Like a lily among thorns is my darling among the young women." And then she speaks again. "Like an apple tree among the trees of the forest is my beloved among the young men. I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. Let him lead me to the banquet hall, and let his banner over me be love." Strengthen me with raisins. Refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. His left arm is under my head, and his right arm embraces me. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. And I don't know whether you've read those verses before. It's very strange. Poetry, of course, in any culture has got its own images and ways of talking that we may be unfamiliar with. Just to pick out a few things, do you see how kind of joyful and intense, and the longing and I delight to sit in his shade, and his fruit is sweet to my taste. You read it, you can see why it has made people feel uncomfortable. In some points, the emotion and the sort of sensual language of this feels a bit uncomfortable for us to read, and yet it's not something that is shied away from or hidden. It's certainly not something that is shameful or bad. This is a picture of love and longing, of sensual enjoyment. His fruit is sweet to my taste. And yet we see it's part of something bigger. Let him lead me to the banquet hall. It may well be speaking of a place, the kind of marriage celebration. These are two young people looking forward to when they can be together forever. And let his banner over me be love. She wanted it in bright lights for everyone to see. He loves me. He's mine. I'm his. In fact, that's the refrain that comes later. My beloved is mine and I am his. That's what this is longing for. And it gets quite intense. Strengthen me with raisins. Refresh me with apples, for I am faint with love. And there's an intensity about this. She feels like she can't almost stand up, can't even keep going. Such is the depth of that feeling. And then we get this picture of the man with the woman. His left arm is under my head. I think the left arm is this sort of more tender, weaker side. And his right arm of strength and protection embraces me. Now, I don't know, we've flown into that. I don't know what you make of those ways of speaking about romantic desire, even sort of erotic, sensual desire and longing. It's maybe not what you would think, but here, just in this poem, we see a picture of sex and love that is passionate and permanent and exclusive and protective and sensual and loving and safe. She's in his shade. He protects her and she loves him and she's faint with it's as I said, it's intense and maybe we're not used to reading this kind of thing. But I wonder, is that what you think the Bible or Christianity has to say about sex and its place in relationships and in the world? Of course, it's once all of that has been said, we see it is a sacred gift. It's not just, you can't read that poem and think, oh, it's just something you do with your body, or it's just something dirty and shameful that actually you shouldn't do or shouldn't talk about, or it's just a trade, you give something to get something. It's more than that, of course it is. And that's part of the fabric of the way the Bible tells a story. And in fact, because it's so special and precious, that's why we see, actually, do you notice that bit? This young woman is speaking to the other women. Verse 7, daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you by the gazelles and by the does of the field, do not arouse or awaken love until it so desires. And maybe that's where we think, see, I knew it. It's sort of restrictive. It's trying to box in love and sex in a very restrictive, confined way. And it's why it doesn't want me to have this thing. And if that's how we think, maybe what's come before helps us. It's not because sex is bad or cheap. Actually, it's because it's so powerful and precious that this woman who's in love tells the other women, be careful with these desires. It's a bit like, fire. In a fireplace in the winter is a beautiful, warming, lovely thing. But of course, the fire, kind of catching fire to your rug, can burn your whole house down. And there's a sense in which, because it's so powerful, because it's so wonderful, actually, it's precious. And I've got two young kids and they've got toys mess all over the house. And one of their favourite toys is a little Peppa Pig laptop. And this thing gets like dropped and bashed and poked and prodded all the time. And to be honest, I don't really care because it's just a little toy. It's not really worth very much. So when I see my son pick that thing up and start shaking it, I'm not really that bothered. Now, if he were to pick up and start shaking the actual laptop that I'm speaking to you now, I would be bothered because it's probably the most expensive single item I own in the house. If he starts smashing that thing up, then there's problems. In a similar way, it's because the picture of sex and intimacy is so precious that the Bible has got ways of safeguarding and restricting and enjoying it rightly. So we see, yes, it's a very positive view of sex. And in fact, we see the whole Bible. I'm really flying through this. The whole Bible is a story. It's a love story of God's love for the world. And it begins with a marriage in the very first book, Genesis chapter 2, and it ends with a marriage. And that's the sign where the whole universe is put right. So sex and intimacy and marriage and oneness is part of the big story. It's not a random little thing that you can disconnect and take out of that story. It's the kind of the big point of everything. And we see that really explicitly when we come to the New Testament, because that's where we see it is a signpost. It's never just about sex. It's never just about human marriage as the sort of context in which Christian ethics say sex is to be enjoyed. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul takes a quotation from the Old Testament. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, he writes. That's the marriage text right at the beginning of the Bible. He says, this is a profound mystery. But I'm talking about Christ and the church. Now that'll slightly blow your mind when you read it, because he's clearly talking about why a man and a woman get married. He's saying the point of that story is ultimately found in the big love story. Marriage is always more than just about marriage. Marriage points to the ultimate love story at the heart of the universe. That's the claim. And maybe you've got more questions you'd like to ask. But do you see, therefore, sex, given to be enjoyed in all these wonderful ways, is truly a sacred gift from above. It's not something we create. It's not something we kind of figure out, but it's given as the most passionate and sensual and loving and supposed to be safe way in which someone can know and be known. The very opposite of a trade, swipe right, swipe left. This is meant to be permanent. It's meant to be forever. But of course you might still be thinking, well, yeah, if you're saying sex is just for marriage and the Bible has ways of talking about all of that, you might still think, yeah, that is all still quite restrictive. Why can't I just do whatever I want, whenever I want? Why do I have to kind of be tied into this story? Can't I make up my own story? You may have heard the story of Abraham Lincoln, the American statesman, was walking past what looked like an auction for a slave. He saw a young girl naked except for the chain she was wearing, and people were bidding to buy her. It's horrific for us to think about. And he was so moved by this scene, thinking, this is awful. These men are bidding money to try and get this girl. He actually entered the auction. He started bidding. And as the bids went up, he just kept bidding more and more and more. And eventually, all the other bidders fell away. And he was given this girl. And you can imagine, she came kind of quivering and anxious and thinking, oh my goodness, this guy, why has he bid so much money for me? What on earth is this white man? She was a black girl. What does he want with me? What's he going to do with me that he would bid so much? And Lincoln, the story goes, said to her, he leaned in and said, you're free. Go free. She's like, what? Does that mean I can say whatever I want to say? He said, yeah, you're free. You can say whatever you want. Does that mean I can be whatever I want to be? Yeah. Can I go anywhere I want to go? He said, yeah, you're free. And then the girl, the story goes, with tears down her face, she said, well then, I'm going to go with you. And she said, I want to be with you. If that's what you're like, if that's what you're willing to pay for me to be free, then I want to be with you. You are the kind, I think I'll be safe with you. I think you're good. And that's just in a very tiny way. We know the story of the Bible actually ends up with Jesus Christ on the cross, dying for the sins of the world, dying so that you and I can be part of this kind of love relationship with God. And it's as we see Jesus pay the ultimate price, way more than a few dollars or however many it was to buy some, actually pays with his own death and blood, The Christian person sees him and sees that and says, you know what, I'll go with you. I want to be on your team. I want to be with you. I don't want to be doing my own thing apart from you. This is the story I want to be part of. And that's why Christians think God's view, the Bible's view on sex, is a beautiful thing. It's a positive thing. And that longing for Olivia Rodrigo, you said forever. That's what Jesus came to give us at the cross. The true love story says you'll be mine forever. We've got it wrong in so many ways. We come with baggage. We're conscious of ways in which we've maybe blown it. Maybe we've hurt others. Maybe we've hurt ourselves. But he has said, in death and blood, you are mine forever if you'll come. Which means that fear of being alone, of being abandoned. If you come to Jesus Christ, that will never happen to you. Because he's paid in death and blood so that you can have this kind of relationship with God. You see, Christianity, I put it to you, really is the better story. The Christian story. Our highest longings and hopes are honoured and even lifted higher. And all our baggage, the reason why we feel delicate and sensitive in the area of sex, that's respected and protected in a Christian view of sex. And even the mess, the brokenness that we bring into this conversation, maybe the things that we've got wrong or have done or been done to, even that can be redeemed and forgiven. There is a future because Jesus Christ, the ultimate bridegroom, came from heaven to win us, win people to himself. And in the end, that's what sex is ultimately pointing to. It's a big thing, it's a beautiful thing. And if you don't understand that story, then you'll never understand what the Bible says in the small details. But if you get it, if you get him, you'll say, I want to go with you. I'm going to pause there. You may have lots of questions. Please ask them. It's a very quick whistle-stop tour of a lot of material. But why don't we take a pause and I'll hand back to the team.
So the first question is, why can't I have all these good things and views on sex without becoming a Christian?
Thank you. That's a great question, isn't it? Because if you find yourself drawn to the kind of way of thinking and speaking about sex and intimacy, you might think, yeah, well, I can. That's a story I can pick. Why do I need the sort of religious faith as part of it? Why do I need to become a Christian? Can I not see the permanent, passionate, exclusive, safe thing as something I want to do without the God thing? I understand that. Firstly, I just want you to think, that's interesting, isn't it? If there's something about this way of living that commends itself to you, that's just an interesting. Why would that be the case? Why is it so good and attractive to me? You can think about that. But the reason I think in the end, I said the Christian view of sex is very, to say it's a sacred gift and to say it's a signpost. Both of those realities don't make sense unless you connect it. Gift from who? Gift for what? That doesn't make sense. The answer is it's a gift from God who made us and loved us. And if you're saying it's a signpost to what? Well, it's a signpost to the ultimate picture of being united and known and loved passionately, deeply, forever by Jesus Christ. So I'm afraid that picture in itself says you can't have this without God. But actually at the same time, I think the very picture says, why would you want to be without this God? If this is what he's really like, if this is the way he's made you, if it confirms and even elevates your highest longings and aspirations, and it respects and protects your weaknesses and fragility, and it offers you forgiveness for the ways in which you've got it wrong, I would say, well, why would you want this picture? Doesn't make sense unless you have Jesus Christ at the heart of it. Now I realise that's a very rushed answer to a good and an important question, so forgive me if there's more there that I haven't answered, but that would be my first thing. In a sense, it commends God to us, and so you try and strip him out of the picture and it loses all its kind of power and reality.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, are some people destined to be alone?
Again, it's hard, isn't it, when you just see a sentence on the screen. I'd love to know what exactly is meant by that. If the question is will some people end up not in a sexually fulfilled romantic relationship will some people be, alone in that sense, then surely looking around the world, looking at history means that's almost certainly true, isn't it? Not everybody. We know that. We look around in this room, or people we know, friends, family. Some people will, in that sense, be likely to be alone. But I suppose the real everybody. I don't know anybody who would deny that. It doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or you're an atheist or whatever. Everybody, you see that reality. The question is, what are you going to do about that? And I think here's where the Christian answer comes into its own. Firstly, because of what Jesus Christ has done on the cross, he's died for you. In a sense, it's the great act of love saying you don't have to be alone. Come to me as you are, and you will be loved and protected and cherished forever. Now I realise that you need a whole other talk to go into that, but the aloneness that we fear deeply, we don't have to experience. Whether or not, here's the thing, whether or not you are in a sexual relationship, whether or not you're married, whether or not any of those things work out, in Christ, the point of all of that is that you can know God forever. And that can be yours, whatever your relationship status. And again, that's why Christianity has something unique to say, and not just about sex, but about singleness, and about because sex is always about more than just sex. It never becomes it's not nothing, it's not cheap, it's not dirty, but it's also not everything. Because if you make it your identity in life and your reason for living, well, what if that relationship doesn't work out? What if he, the Olivia Rodrigo thing, maybe he actually falls for the blonde girl instead, and you're driving on your, that's the end of your world. But actually, if sex is part of something bigger and a gift to be enjoyed, but also a signpost to life with God, then that's not the end of the story for you. And the ultimate destination, as it were, is I said the Bible begins and ends with a wedding. The final wedding is when Jesus Christ is united to his people forever. It's in fact, it's a story of a whole new heavens and earth. It's where the universe is headed. And that's the end point of sort of what sex and intimacy and passion and love now points towards, is that. And if you come to Jesus, you're not going to miss out on that. That's what it's going to. So I guess it just gives us a slightly different way of thinking about sexual fulfillment now, but also singleness now. So I'm sorry, that's a long-winded answer to your question, but trying to cover a few different things. Again, if it wasn't what you were asking for, please just put another question in the chat or whatever, and we'll have another go.
Thank you so much. The next question is, Christians have sex within marriage, right? Even Christians have sexual desires. Does that mean a Christian should repress all sexual desires before marriage?
Thank you. Christians have sex within marriage, right? Yes, well, as I said, sex is given as this great good gift to be enjoyed within the context, like the fire in the fireplace, within the context of marriage, yes. And actually, the Bible is hugely positive about that. Not something to be ashamed, not something to think is dirty or bad. Yeah, so actually to be married, part of what that commitment is to be to give of yourself and your body and your kind of sexuality to your spouse. So yes, Christians should. Where obviously I say that knowing that for there's plenty of reasons: physical disabilities, age, illness, all sorts of things make that really difficult and painful. So I don't want to paint with a broad brush, but positively, yes, that's right. Even Christians have sexual desires. I want to say yes. I think all more or less all people have some kinds of sexual desires. Though again, there's a spectrum of how we're wired on this. Does that mean a Christian should repress all sexual desires before marriage? It's a really good question, and again, all these questions deserve longer answers than they're getting. But I think what we see, that desire in the Christian faith, is not something that we see as wholly negative. For example, in the kind of philosophy of Buddhism, actually the way to enlightenment is to overcome desire and to suppress desire, because then you're not captured by it, and desire is somehow seen as something bad to be overcome. Generally speaking, Christianity doesn't think of desire in that way. Generally speaking, desire and longings are part of a good created gift from God, part of who we are. But of course, as with all the gifts that God has given us, unfortunately, our experience of it now is with all sorts of brokenness and dysfunction. That's true whether you're married or not. We didn't go into it into the thought. The reason is we were made to be in this marriage-like relationship with God. We're made to find all our desires and longings connecting with Him. As soon as we turn away from Him, which humanity has done since the very first generation, as we turn away from God, we find everything goes wrong in different ways. That's true at the level of my biology and my desires, and I'm not the person I should be, and so my desires are sometimes all over the place. I either don't desire things that I should desire and are good, or actually I desire things that are harmful to me or harmful to others. So you've got quite a nuanced attitude towards desire in the Christian faith. It's not all bad, it's probably not all good, and yet what do we do with that? Should you repress all sexual desires before marriage? I would say we should seek for those desires. The thing about a desire is it's sort of taking you somewhere. It's pushing you in a certain direction. And the question is, what direction are we going to go? I do think the Bible teaches that outside of marriage, abstinence from sexual activity is what we're called to. But that's not to say suppression of all the desires itself. It's what do I do with it? Well, I think partly what I might do is that may well be if you're going out with someone and you're in a relationship and you know that you have a sexual desire for that person, that might well be an incentive or an encouragement to try and get married to that person, and that's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. But actually, if you know that's not, it's not that there's particular marriage on the horizons, then I suppose what we are called to do is, the biblical word is, Jesus, if they come after me, they must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. And therefore, if a desire, even a sexual desire, is going to cause me to go away from God, whether that's to sleep with someone who's not my spouse, to have inappropriate fantasies, to use pornography, to do other things where I can see this is not what the gift is for, then yeah, I am called to turn away from going in that direction. But it's not quite as simple as saying, oh, well, I must just repress all my desires. I guess ultimately, because it's a pointer to God, the fulfillment of the desire, not the sex, but the longings that underlie it, will ultimately be found in knowing God and knowing Jesus. And I've just come across a little book called Jesus, Lover of My Soul, which actually is a series of reflections on Song of Songs, looking at this issue and saying it points us to the deeper spiritual intimacy we're made for with God. Now, I know if you're not a Christian, you're listening in, that sounds absolutely wacky. I get that. But again, if you kind of step into the story and see how all the different notes of the chord fit together, then it's not something to repress, but it is something that ultimately should drive us towards God and faithfulness to Him, and then faithfulness to other people in the relationships He's called us to.
Okay, thank you so much. The next question is, if Christ is enough and His love is seen through the Bible, what is the point of marriage?
That's a tricky question because, yeah, clearly even what it means when to say Christ is enough and His love, it can sound very abstract. In one sense, we see that if marriage is a signpost, in a sense, it's telling that story of something better, that you were made for intimate relationship with another, and that other is Jesus. And marriage is telling that story. Of course, Christian singleness also tells that story in a different way. It says marriage and intimacy is pointing to Christ. And so what's the point of marriage? One, yes, I think it does point people to a greater, bigger, ultimate marriage, if you want to use that language, of Christ and the church. But of course, it's also a good created gift that God has given. You know, the Church of England marriage service says for the raising of children, for the enjoyment of one another in physical and non-physical intimacy. So actually, the sufficiency of Christ is not a reason to undervalue marriage, but also it's not a reason to overvalue marriage, as if a marriage relationship can satisfy all my hopes and longings. Actually, we honor Christ in marriage, but also we enjoy the created gifts that He's given us in it. Companionship, sex, intimacy, to raise children, to all those things are part of the package, and we mustn't therefore over spiritualize the way we think about it.
Okay, thank you. Because of time, this will be our last question. which is what if you have already had sex? What then?
Thank you. And I presume you mean outside of the context of marriage that I was speaking to. That's why I began by saying we all come at this question with baggage. We all come with fragility, and I want to be very conscious and sensitive about that. The very short answer is that's why Jesus came. Jesus came for people who have not done things the way that he would say we should have done things. That's not the. It doesn't have to be the end of the story. Of course, if and particularly if you've had sex with someone, the relationship breaks down. There's baggage there. There's scar tissue there. It hurts, and sometimes it takes a. There's all sorts of things that are almost like the physical language of scars that we bear, but it's not the end of the story. For if you come to Christ, all that we've done, all the failure, brokenness, pain we've had, we actually bring to Him. And the reason Jesus died on the cross was so that whatever there is in our past, not just our sexual past, but the whole story, and no matter how bad, no matter how broken, no matter how many times we've got it wrong, actually Jesus says that doesn't have to be the end of the story for you. I've paid is the ultimate ransom price. I've paid it. You don't have to be under the weight of that. That doesn't have to define you anymore. And it's as we hear him say that, to say paid in full, you're free, then we say, hey, well, I want to go with you now. I want to be with you. I want to learn what life is like with you. And therefore that will always be part of your story, but it won't be the end of your story, because God, what he does is he takes things that maybe we've got wrong, maybe others have got wrong to us, and he weaves it into something better. It's like a smashed up jar that he actually mends and makes something beautiful out of. So that's the hope. Whatever your past or mine, Jesus Christ offers, the Bible word is redemption, a new and better future because of what he's done. And it's free, you can have it. We think it's only for those who are good enough. It's the opposite. It's for those who know they're not good enough. If you think you're fine, then you don't need Jesus, you don't need forgiveness, you don't need the cross. But for those who know we haven't got things right, Christianity is the only place where you will find full and true and lasting forgiveness and hope for a better future. And so please don't let that put you off. Actually, it should draw you closer to find the one who offers that hope.
Thank you so much. Once again, thank you for the talk and the Q&A, Santhosh.